everyone, welcome to my book channel. I'm Lu, and today we're talking about a brand new ongoing fantasy series. They are Blood of the Old Kings and Blood for the Undying Throne. So this is a brand new fantasy series written by South Korean author Sun-il Kim and translated by Anton Hur. The first installment was originally published in Korean in 2016, translated and published in English in 2024. The second one is hot off the press and published in October 2025. So the first thing that I wanted to mention is that although these are translated works, I would say that they were written with an English-speaking audience, possibly a global audience in mind. For example, the main characters' names are Lauren, Kane, and Ariane, and the location names are Ireland, Komori, and so on. So I would say that the author wrote these with English language readers in mind. So although they are translated works, I don't feel like you would have any language barrier with the names, places, or writing style of these books. So now let's go back to the first book to talk about the premise, setting, and characters of this series. This story is set in an empire that runs on necromancy. So there are many sorcerers in this empire. However, the magic only happens after they die. Once they die, their corpses are wrapped in chains and kept in special lead coffins covered in ruins and then used as power generators for the empire. The empire has legions of soldiers wearing powered armors and also giant war machines. Some of these are called gigatherians. They are massive and imposing, and they can pretty much wipe out any resistance to the empire within seconds. And the reason why the empire needs so much power is because it is made up of individual kingdoms that want to be free from the empire's control. So let's take a look at the map of this world. The empire's power is centralized in the imperial heartland, in the imperial capital, but to the north there are several major kingdoms that have a big role to play in this story. So Lauren, Kane, and Ariane are all from Ireland, and the people of Ireland have something called Talarin around their necks, which is kind of a clan marking. I guess you can imagine it as kind of a neck tattoo. And then there's Komori, where there is a major resistance force, and the king and prince of Komori will play a major role in the first book as well. And then crossing over to the other side of the Rook Mountains, there is the Mercian Wastes. So this was originally the kingdom of Mercia, but then it was decimated by something called the Star of Mercia. That's kind of a fantasy weapon of mass destruction, if you will. And especially in the second book, Ariane will travel to this region to uncover the true origin of the Star of Mercia and exactly what happened to this kingdom. So the first book mainly takes place between Ireland and the imperial capital, with major character influences from Komori, and the second book takes place between the imperial capital and the Mercian Wastes. So as you can see, this story has very expansive and complex world building, which is what we always love in a fantasy series. And also, I really enjoy the characterization of this author. Starting from the first book, Lauren woke up in a volcano that she had jumped into, and she was facing a seven-eyed dragon. So she had risked her life to ask the dragon's help to avenge her family who were murdered by the Empire. Lauren is later revealed to be a woman in her late 30s and pretty small in stature, and she teaches sword fighting for a living. So she never really thought of herself as a chosen one or a destined hero. She was simply motivated by this passion to avenge her family and the people of her kingdom. Next, we meet Kane, who is a bespectacled young man, and he was wandering the capital city trying to figure out what happened to his friend Fianna, who had died. So Kane is an orphan, and his parents also died resisting the empire. And Fianna is someone that took him in when he was 12 and having nowhere to go. And then later on, he kind of just did odd jobs and doing whatever he can to survive on the streets. And he was ambushed by agents from the Ministry of Intelligence. So he started to understand that Fianna's death was perhaps connected to some larger conspiracy that might be beyond his power. The third character, Ariane, is a teenage girl studying sorcery at the Imperial Academy, also located in the capital. So study is kind of a term used loosely here because, as I mentioned before, the sorcerers in this empire only become useful after they die. So when they're alive, they don't really wield magic or sorcery. Even the most accomplished ones of them only become sorcerer engineers. So their livelihood basically consists of taking care of other power generators, which are the dead bodies of fellow sorcerers and kind of maximizing the power that they generate for the benefit of the empire. So the magic system in this story is very bleak. And Ariane, not being the most talented or successful student in this academy, she's failed a number of classes, so she was repeatedly told that the only thing that she was good for was to become a power generator after she died. But all this started to change when Ariane started to hear the voice of a dead sorcerer speaking directly to her in her mind. And this sorcerer is later revealed to be Eldred, and he has a very storied past. And his power and his origin story became crucial to the second book as well. And what I find really fascinating is how much these characters really grew and developed throughout the course of the story, especially in the first book. So they all started as very ordinary people who don't have a lot of power, and they've never really received any kind of validation that they would be hero or they're destined to be great. They are a widow, a street urchin, and an unremarkable student. However, throughout the course of this story, they all stepped into the roles of heroes. Lauren started to realize how much power she actually wielded with her sword and became a great leader of her people. And Kane started to realize that he really needed to carry on Fianna's legacy and help people and do the right thing whenever he could. And Ariane started to realize she actually had a lot more power, especially within her mind, than all of her teachers has ever told her. And their lives became intricately connected until they joined forces to take a stand against the Empire. And all of this happens within the span of 355 pages, which brings me to my next point, which is the pacing of this story. So this is a very fast-paced fantasy. When I was rereading this book, I realized when I finished kind of the first 50 pages, the characters are well underway. They have initiated their journey, and some of them have already met each other and joined forces, and there had already been battles that took place. As compared to other fantasies and even like fantasy standalones, I don't think I've ever seen this much happen just within the first 50 pages. I'm more used to like the characters just starting to enter the realm of magic, or they're kind of hanging around in a tavern, or they're training in a school. So mostly it's like a very slow establishment at the beginning, but this story jumps right into action, and it is action-packed and heart-pounding from beginning to end. And then when we come to book 2, I would say the pacing actually slowed down a little bit because book 2 is both a sequel and a prequel in this series, which is not something that I expected at all. I don't think I've ever read a fantasy series that's structured quite like this. So in book 2, we both see some main characters deal with the aftermath of what happened at the end of book 1, some of them stepping into a position of power and dealing with assassins and then political shifts within the empire. And like I mentioned, Ariane traveled to Mercia to learn the history of Mercia and more about the history of Eldred. So the story kind of takes place in two parallel timelines, if that makes sense. I was actually a little bit surprised by the main perspectives chosen for book 2. So there were certain characters that I expected to have a major presence that didn't due to certain things that happened in the world. And then there are new characters that are introduced when Ariane was learning the history of Mercia. So as a reader, I kind of had to quickly shift my expectation and jump on board with a newly introduced character and follow her perspective. That being said, I think book 2 actually introduced more political complexity to the world building. From things like Mercia is actually called Mersa by the people that are native to the land and speak the language there. And then it's kind of almost anglicized by the empire and everyone else when it's referred to as Mercia. And then there's also the issue of the Ministry of Intelligence, which had a major role in book 2, actually being a completely separate political body from something called the Office of Truth. And the two of them are actually vying for power in this empire. And they have their own like individual interest and schemes and conspiracy. And more importantly, it paints a more complex picture of the relationships between the individual kingdoms and the empire. So each kingdom is not as simple as a nation to be liberated from the empire because each kingdom is controlled by their own king that rule over the people. And the people are not always happy with their ruler. So within some of these major kingdoms, there's actually political dissent between the people and their king. So now there's several different levels of power and inequality, from the people to their king or regional prefect, and then up to the empire. So there's so much more conflict and complexity than we thought throughout book one. So although it feels like a very unconventional choice to structure the sequel as both a sequel and a prequel, it actually adds quite a bit to this world. But that being said, I personally didn't love the ending of book two. I feel like there's a major choice made by one of the characters near the end of book two that would just cause like chaos and uncertainty in this world. And I have no idea how that would translate in book three and how the author would bring it all in and wrap up all of the loose threads. And at time of recording, I haven't found any definitive timeline as to when book three will be released, but the publisher Tor Books has planned to release the entire series in English. So all we can do is wait and hope that all will be well and all will be explained by the final installment in this series. So overall, this is a very imaginative and exciting fantasy series. It's fast-paced, action-packed, and it's all great, expansive political world building, characters that are carved out in detail, and really grow and change throughout the entire story. But more importantly, this is a story of ordinary people becoming heroes and resisting oppression and exploitation, which is a very inspiring and timely theme in our changing world. I highly recommend that you check out this fantasy series. I hope you've enjoyed today's video. Please let me know in the comments below what you thought of my recommendation and review, and please let me know what new exciting fantasy stories you are reading. Thank you so much for watching. See you next time.